Hi, welcome to my video about how to plot from your character's defining moment. What is the defining moment? Well, in Western storytelling, it is the moment of the hero's journey where it looks like all is lost and the character must finally face the lie they believe in order to move on to the next stage of their journey. And the hero's journey is just another way of describing the way we usually tell stories, at least in the West. And I like to use the outline or the framework of 5-point plot structure. I have a free resource about 5-point plot structure on my website at www.talinawinters.com/editing, and you can easily download that. But I am going to be talking about it in this video today. So let's go. The term black moment is common in writing circles. However, when I was first figuring out plot on my own as a writer, because I sit and I analyzed a lot of things, I did get the idea for 5-point plot structure. I got the basics of that from screenwriter Alan Denman. However, after I took his webinar covering the very basics of 5-point plot structure, I then spent the next 2 years analyzing every story that I watched or read and understanding exactly what happens at each of those places in 5-point plot structure, and what are the general themes and things that make a story really resonate emotionally. That's what we want to do as writers. We want to really dig into our readers' emotions, and our structure is a good part of that. So the black moment is so important that I usually actually start there, because once I understand what happens in the black moment, then I can understand what the rest of my plot is leading up to. So the black moment is usually something that happens about 3/4, that's like 75 to 90% of the way through your story. So the black moment, or this defining moment, is when the character finally has to face the thing that's been holding them back all the time for the whole rest of the plot from succeeding. They have to face their lie, and then they can either choose to, in the final battle, accept the truth, or they can choose to reject the truth and embrace their lie. And that will determine whether we have a comedy or a tragedy, because if they embrace the truth, we have not necessarily a happy ending. Sometimes the ending is still sad in some ways, but it's a satisfying ending. Okay? Whereas if they reject the truth, if they embrace their lie, we usually call that a fairly unsatisfying ending. And there's reasons that writers will do that sometimes, but there's also a reason why it's not a very common way to end a story. Usually as humans, we want to read through a story and be satisfied at the end. So let's figure out how we can figure out what this black moment conflicts are, why it's important, and how we can use that then to plot the rest of our story from this point 3/4 of the way through the story. Okay, so you've probably heard the terms inner conflict and outer conflict before. These two conflicts are what basically propel your character through the entire plot. At the very beginning of the story, they have a lie they believe. The lie they believe is the thing that's going to be continually causing them problems every time, and holding them back every time they come in contact with their outer conflict, which is whatever external force or situation or circumstance is propelling the plot forward, is forcing them to change, okay? And along the way, at each of these points in the plot, basically every scene in the plot, you have to have some kind of a touch on both the inner and the outer conflict, or the scene probably doesn't need to be there. Now, each point in the plot will move each of these different conflicts forward a varying amount. So the black moment is when you get probably the most movement on the inner conflict. And that's why, if you understand what that is, then you can go back to the beginning of your story and you can continually heap problems on your character that are going to cause them to face that lie, which is what we want. We need to have them change or come to terms with what their lie is, with their inner conflict, in order so that they can succeed at the end. So when I think of this part of the plot, And again, relating to 5-point plot structure, if you're not sure what that is, please go to my website, download that resource. But we're just going to talk here about this one section of the plot. This is, as I said, is about 75 to 90% of the way through. Generally, what's just happened is your character has had an encounter with the primary antagonist, whether that's a person, force, situation, whatever it is. They've just had a major encounter with this person. It's usually no longer a stand-in, it's the actual whatever it is that they are up against. And it doesn't matter what genre we're in. That's why I'm trying to be generic. I actually really like to use the term author Kristen Lamb has coined, called Big Boss Troublemaker, or BBT. And that just kind of is representative of whatever it is, that primary outer conflict that's been propelling the story forward. And usually up until this point, it's been propelling it by stand-ins, but it, again, depends on your genre. But now we've just had this, what I call the false final battle. I've heard other people call it the faux, which is just short for faux ending, it means the same thing. Basically, it's the point where you feel like you've just had a big final battle with the character, or with the antagonist, the BBT, but it's not the end of the story yet. Now, a lot of times, the result of that conflict is that your main character has lost. They've been wounded or injured or defeated in some way, and it leads to this moment where it looks like all is lost, and they decide to give up. They're done. They don't think they can do this anymore. That's why it's called the black moment. However, it doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it actually looks like they've won. They've done a good thing. They've kind of had this feel-good moment almost at this point in the story. But the problem is they haven't faced their lie yet, and they haven't changed. So the story isn't over because they haven't actually changed at all. And that's why even when your false final battle has kind of a happy resolution to it, you still need to have that black moment. And then we go right into, from the black moment, what I usually call the spiritual moment. And the reason I call it that is because it's the moment when the character recognizes the lie that they're believing. In the black moment, it looks like the lie is correct. Their original perspective at the very beginning of the story looks like it's correct. And so they're like, and that's why you've got that all is lost feeling. Because they're back to like, well, everything I've been learning is wrong. I should have just stuck with what I believed all along, or there's no way I can defeat this, whatever the BBT is. There's no way I can overcome this. I'm giving up. I'm done. And then immediately, like, it's very, very short. In a movie, it's a matter of like 30 seconds usually after we get to that point. We go into what I call the spiritual moment. And that is usually facilitated by a mentor character, because oftentimes our characters, if they're in that mental state that they have embraced the lie, they're not going to just immediately recognize the truth on their own. And at least most of the time, they either need to have a remembered conversation in their head with somebody who has already tried to show them the truth, or there needs to be a character right there in that scene that's going, wait. That's not who you are. That's not the truth. This is the truth. And then they could look at it and go, oh my goodness. And there's usually a very spiritual element to it, because they are having a major shift in their worldview. So as some examples, of this final battle, black moment, spiritual moment, I like to use actual hero's journey stories that are very blatant because it's easy to see, but I will give you some other examples too. So one of my favorites is Moana. In Moana's black moment, she has just encountered the big lava monster and been defeated, and then her ally, Maui, has run away. And she's like, I can't do this on my own. I'm just a young girl. I don't have any special abilities. And Ocean, which is the character who chose her, it was like the one who set her on her path. She's like, choose someone else. And she throws back the heart of Te Fiti, which was what her mission was, to return that to Te Fiti, the goddess. And she throws it back into the ocean. And then in an actual spiritual moment, the spirit of her dead grandmother shows up on her raft and says, that's not who you are. And literally the theme of that book, or that movie, sorry, is who are you? What makes you who you are? So that one's very, very obvious, very blatant. That's why I like to use it. Other examples would be when Frodo finally, he doesn't think he can get the ring into Mount Doom, and, in Lord of the Rings, and he doesn't even really want to anymore because the ring is such a hold of him. Some other black moment things. Sorry, I'm just looking here. I like to use JeanClaude Van Damme because in his movies, it was a bit of a trope, and my dad always used to joke about this, that JeanClaude Van Damme's character always would wait until he was just a beaten, bloody, messy pulp on the floor, and there seems like no way that he should actually be able to get up again, but he does. That's when he draws in his last reserve of strength, gets off the floor, and comes back to win everything. Okay, but that's, even though it's a totally different genre, that's his black moment to his spiritual moment where he, and I don't know, I haven't watched a lot of Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, but I think he probably usually does self-propel him through that spiritual moment where he says, no, I will not lose, So it depends on your genre how this looks. Now, for some examples of where that false final battle actually ends, and it looks like a good thing, and we're done, but it's not done. One I recently rewatched was Speed, and of course in Speed we've got like all these hostages on a bus that if it goes below a certain speed, it's going to explode. And Keanu Reeves' character finally manages to get all the hostages off the bus, and the bus driver, who is the very cute Sandra Bullock, and they have a moment where they're like laughing and flirting, and you're like, oh, yay! But wait, we still have a terrorist out there. He still has some tricks up his sleeve, and now he's just mad that they managed to overcome him in this one situation. So that's still not done. Another one in a different genre is the movie Like Father with Kristen Bell and Kelsey Grammer. Kristen plays a workaholic who's estranged from her father, and she gets left at the altar because she can't even stop working on her wedding day. And her father had shown up to the wedding, and they end up, I don't want to spoil it all for you, but they end up on the honeymoon cruise together. They're stuck there together for, I don't know, I think it's like 10 days or something. And then they have to bond. And in that, after the false final battle in that movie, it looks like Kristen and Kelsey have kind of like patched things up. And I don't remember the character names, I'm sorry. But Kristen and Kelsey have patched things up. They're like, oh, yay, we're actually, on good ground again. Except for the problem is that Kristen's character has not actually confronted or overcome her workaholic tendency yet. And she actually chooses at that point not to go help her father who needs it, but to go back to work. And you're like, oh no. So that's a very blatant where it was like, it looked good, but all of a sudden we realized that there's still that black moment. She still has her lie. She still hasn't gone through it. So that is, I hope you're getting the idea of how these all work together. Just start looking for that in pretty much every episode or story or movie or book. Start looking for that black moment, like the false final battle, black moment, spiritual moment, and start asking yourself the question, what is the truth that I had to learn here, or the character had to learn here? So here are some questions that I usually ask myself when I'm plotting to help me figure out what is happening in that startup part of my story so that I can then go back and work towards that very easily from the beginning of my plot. And these are all kind of different ways of asking the same question, but it depends on your genre, and also sometimes it depends on where your head is at, which question is going to kind of tweak it for you. So what is the lie my character or characters believe that will prevent them from overcoming the big boss troublemaker? What do they need to learn in order to defeat the big boss troublemaker? So, and this kind of goes back to even earlier in the plot, but, they need to learn something, and that's the truth, okay? So, who do they need to become in order to defeat the big boss troublemaker? So again, what is the truth they need to embrace? What truth do they need to discover in order to defeat the big boss troublemaker? Again, these are similar. But this would be what happens in the spiritual moment. Like, what is that truth that they're going to grab hold of? And because sometimes it's hard to figure out what their lie is, but once you know what their truth is, what they actually have to do to win, then you can kind of reverse engineer that and go, oh, well, if that's what they have to know to win, then before that, they believe this. And then the last question is, what gets in the way of them overcoming the big boss troublemaker? Okay, so again, all just kind of different ways of looking at the same question, but they will help you kind of work out those inner and outer conflicts that both come to a head right there in that false final battle, black moment, spiritual moment, kind of really compact part of your plot. Okay, so how do we use this to plot from the black moment? I'm going to try to make this not too long. This is basically when I go through my 5-point plot structure. Once I've figured out what those inner and outer conflicts are, and I'm pretty solid on those, then I can go back and I can apply it to all the different parts of my plot structure. So obviously at the very beginning, they have this lie they believe. Their normal world is that they are existing with this lie as part of their worldview. And of course, at the very beginning, you're going to introduce your big boss troublemaker, which is their outer conflict. So we've got inner and outer conflict introduced right at the beginning of the story. And that outer conflict challenges the lie. Okay, so your big boss troublemaker is there to propel change through your story. So it needs to challenge whatever that character's lie is. For instance, in Star Wars, at the beginning of the first Star Wars movie, Luke Skywalker is just a farm boy on Tatooine, okay? And he gets challenged to that he's actually not just a farm boy from Tatooine, that he's actually very special, and that he has a purpose and a destiny, and he actually has some pretty cool powers. And it takes him, so that's kind of what propels him out of that normal world. And he kind of has to go through the whole story before he gets to the point where he really accepts who he is and is able to then use that to overcome the big boss troublemaker. Once the character has, so they get challenged by the big boss troublemaker, and usually at first they don't accept the challenge, but then they do. They get to the point of the plot where they can no longer ignore whatever it is happening that's challenging their lie. Because at first they're going to reject it because of their lie. They're like, no, I can't do that because of this lie that I believe. Okay. But then there comes a point where they can't do that anymore and they have to go on. Then we have rising tension section after that challenge has been accepted. And this goes to up about 40% of the way through your book. At this point, they think that the big boss troublemaker is going to be easy to overcome. They usually have some rose-tinted ideas because of their lie or whatever, or maybe they don't really understand the full magnitude of the problem. And then they have some encounters or scenarios, usually with some kind of a stand-in to the big boss troublemaker, which again challenge the character's lie, and they finally realize what they're up against. There's usually some kind of, they have a small victory there often, or at least move forward a little bit in their plot. But they also finally understand that when they finally get to the real big problem, it's not going to be that easy to solve, okay? Then we have our midpoint climax, which usually goes to, between 50 to 60% of the way through your story. There's several scenes that kind of all build up. And the characters at this point make a lot of progress against both the big boss troublemaker and with their lie, actually. So they move significantly closer to their goal of overcoming whatever challenge it is was presented at the beginning. And they often receive information through that process that presents their lie in a new light. But they're still not willing or ready to change. But for the first time, they actually start to go, oh, I never thought of it that way. And so that's usually a really feel-good moment. So there's outer victories, there's inner victories, and that usually sets up the conditions that for the part that follows it, which is a period of learning, training, or bonding, when your character actually learns the things they need to, like the skills they need to have in order to overcome that big boss troublemaker at the end. Or they're also finally bonding with some characters that they were probably at odds with up until this point in the story. And this is usually a good point to reveal some backstory of your character, by the way. That's an aside. But you can see how this part of the plot is shifting them forward both towards their defeating the big boss troublemaker, but also to help them to recognize their lie. They're not ready for it yet, but they're getting there. So then at this point, they're feeling really ready to encounter the big boss troublemaker, and that's when they go into that false final battle. They go and they encounter their BBT. However, they lose, or they don't lose. They appear not to lose. They might appear to have a victory, but they still haven't actually overcome their lie. So here we are, our false final battle, black moment, spiritual moment. We've already talked about what happens at each of those things, so I'm just going to go on. So after they finally recognize their lie in the spiritual moment, they still have not accepted the truth. They know what the lie is now. They know what the truth is. For the most part, there's probably still one more piece they need, because that's going to come out in our final battle with the BBT. It usually looks like some card up the sleeve of the BBT. They pull it out and it challenges their lie one final time. And so this is the point of decision, where this character decides to either embrace the truth or reject it, and then we get our satisfying or unsatisfying ending. That is how we have that lie and the truth and the BBT, how they all work together at all these different places in the plot. And it's so important that you use both. It doesn't really matter what your genre is. Even if your genre, if you got a series, it's like a mystery or something, and maybe your main character doesn't have a ton of personal arc in each individual book in the series, they still have a lie they believe at the beginning, in the sense that typically they make some kind of a hypothesis, or the evidence seems to point in one particular direction. And then, so they've got like these false leads that they're following through the story until they get to the end, and they finally get the last piece of truth and are able to overcome whoever it is that they are, the detective story is about. So you can actually apply this to just any genre. All right. So I hope this video has helped you understand that if you can really nail down what that defining moment is for your character and your plot, the false final battle into the black moment, into the spiritual moment, that very narrow window in your plot where everything comes to a head. If you can understand that, then you can easily go back and set up situations throughout your whole plot where your character is constantly encountering not only their big boss troublemaker, but also their lie, which is the whole point. And that gives your story the heart that will bring your readers coming back for more. Good luck. Happy writing. Please check out my writing tips blog, which is why I make these videos, to actually accompany my writing tips blog on my website at www.talinawinters.com/writing-tips. And I also have a Patreon page for writers and readers, where I have free fiction and also offer these tutorials. And it just is, if you find value in what I do, it would be great if you would go check that out and see if you would like to become involved in my community another way. And I also have a monthly books and inspiration newsletter. So if you go to my website, you'll be able to find that, sign up for that right away. And it's a great place to hang out too. I look forward to hearing from you. Leave me a comment if you have any questions. Be sure to subscribe, and happy writing.